for a history lesson? A lot of the feedback I get from Instagram is that you want to know more about Norwegian history. And of course I'm going to give it to you. And today I am talking about a certain style period in Norwegian history. Dragon style. Because while the rest of the Western world was all about the new art, Art Nouveau, or Jugendstil, as it was called in Germany and Austria, we had our own style, dragon style. But why? Why did we have dragon style? That is what I'm going to talk about today. So, why dragon style? It was popular in the period 1880s to 1915, and you could see it in architecture, in interiors, in art, jewelry, and it had very strong links to the late Viking Age and early Middle Ages. And that was because that was a very prosperous and powerful period in Norwegian history. And we had Harald Hårfagre, or Harold the Fair-Haired, who gathered Norway to one kingdom. He didn't want to cut his hair until he had gathered all of Norway into one country. And then we had our saint. We have one saint, and that's Olaf, King Olaf. He was known as Olav Digre, which means Olav the Great, not because he was a great man, but because he was a great man. He was huge. Not Henry VIII huge, he was just very tall. And he was killed in 1030 in a battle, and then he was sanctified after that. And then we had Magnus Lagabøte, who made our first laws. They came, and I have to read here, in 1276. And he, in English, he is Magnus the Lawmender. And these were all powerful kings. And we had a lot of communications with England, with France, well, abroad. We exported, we imported. It was a good period. So why did it stop? We can partly blame the plague, the Black Plague, that hit Norway in 1349 and wiped out 2/3 of our population, amongst them all nobility in the whole of Norway, within just a few years. That's crazy. But what was the real downfall was a marriage, isn't it always? And this particular marriage was between Håkon VI, who was a Norwegian king, and a Danish princess. Håkon, he was also the heir to the Swedish crown through his father, who was the Swedish King Magnus, while Margaret was the daughter of Valdemar Atterdag in Denmark. And she was sent to Norway as an 11-year-old girl, and she was raised on Akershus Slott, which I have shown you many times here in Oslo, until she started up her married life with Håkon. And they had a son, Olav. And when her father died without any heirs, she got Olav appointed king, and she governed in his place in Denmark. And then she was widowed, and she did the same thing in Norway. So now she had both Denmark and Norway, and she governed both. And that was very, very unusual. Usually there were men, uncles, friends who governed when a child was put as king. But she was a very, very strong-minded woman. But then fate struck again, and Olav died only 17 years old. But she was a very resourceful woman, so she adopted her sister's grandchild, Erik of Pommern, and got him to Norway, and he became not only Danish and Norwegian king, but also the Swedish. And that is the main reason for Norway's downfall, Kalmarunionen, the Union of Kalmar, which was in 1397. So, between 1397 and 1814, we were under Danish rule. We call that the Danish period, the equivalent to the Dark Ages. And, well, the Danish did some nice things for us, probably, but we were always in opposition to the Danish rule. So when the Danish king was on Napoleon's side, and we all know what happened to Napoleon, if you don't, you should look it up. And when his downfall was a fact, then Denmark lost Norway. And we fought like crazy to get our own constitution, because it was agreed that Norway wasn't strong enough to be their own country. So who would get us? Sweden won. But since we actually managed to get our own constitution in 1814, it was signed, wait for it, on the 17th of May. Of course, that's why I wear my bunad. So from 1814 until 1905, we were in union with Sweden. And we're getting close to the point. Aren't you happy? This is taking forever. So, why the dragon style, Mona? Get to the point. Okay, so we had first that union with Denmark that ended up not being a union. And then we had the union in Sweden that was a union, because we had our own government, but we didn't have our own foreign minister, and we had to share the king with Sweden. Although they said they were kings of both Sweden and Norway. So Norway was a separate country. That was important to us. But from the 1860s and onwards, we got more and more unhappy. And it was also important for the Norwegian people to find back their pride in being Norwegian. So that was why they went back in history and had a revival of the style that was so in fashion in the late Viking Age, early Middle Ages, the dragon style. The ornaments that you can see on the stave churches that we found on the Viking ships that were dug up from the ground in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we were sort of finding our own identity. And also the farmer was glorified, because back then we were all farmers, no industry. So the independent farmer living from the land and in their wooden houses, that was sort of the ideal. And you can see that in both the exteriors and interiors of the time when the dragon style was in fashion. So yeah, finding back our identity. I could just have said that and not all the rest. But that wouldn't have been fun, would it? And you have to remember all this, because I'm coming back with an own video about the bunad tradition. And then you have to remember this, okay?